So let's take a look at what we've covered on the series so far. We covered what defines a serial killer, as well as serial killers like John Wayne Gacy, Ed Gein, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Toolbox Killers, and the Zodiac Killer. In short, we covered an idea and tangible serial killers. What we've yet to discuss is a theory. Specifically, the theory that there is an unknown serial killer out and about who has yet to be caught. This unknown serial killer is only known as the Smiley Face Killer. For explanation's sake, allow me to propose a question. When a body of a man who had been intoxicated heavily is found in the water, the simplest explanation is that it was simply an accidental drowning. But what happens when this kind of thing happens a multitude of times, all with the same MO, all dying in the exact same way, only to be found in a body of water with a painted smiley face beside them? This can't all be a coincidence, can it? Well, the Smiley Face Killer theory claims that all these deaths are not coincidental, nor are they suicides. But rather, the theory points to claim that these deaths were the result of a killer known only as the Smiley Face Killer, like mentioned earlier. Like the last killer we took a look at, the Zodiac Killer, we don't know much, if anything at all, about this theoretical Smiley Face Killer. All we really know is that the killer started their spree of murders around 1997, and their crimes carried over to 11 different states. As such, we'll just jump straight to the victims. It should be known that should this theory be correct, and there is an actual Smiley Face Killer, there are at least 40 deaths that can be linked to them. Moreover, practically all the victims of this supposed killer were white, college-age males, all of which were described as athletic, handsome, and successful in their academic career. This led some theorizers and believers of the theory to surmise that the killer was probably killing out of jealousy, possibly because they were clumsy, possibly ugly or average, and probably not the sharpest tool in the shed. In addition, the victims were all spotted at bars or parties getting drunk the night they disappeared. The bodies would then be found by a body of water, usually, if not always, during cold climates in the winter months. In fact, a majority of them were discovered during December, January, and February of the given years, with the exception of a few. That being said, we can't exactly cover all the victims here, at risk of making this video way too long. So we'll cover the 3 that are present in most articles discussing the Smiley Face Killers. Let's begin with one of the first murders of the alleged Smiley Face Killer, that being 21-year-old Patrick McNeil. On February 1997, he was last seen having a good time with his friends late one night at Manhattan's Dapper Dog Bar. It was just your typical Friday night. That was until everyone had to head home. Being completely wasted, McNeil understandably walked home, since he was in no condition to drive home, nor did he have any money for a cab. Unbeknownst to him, or any of his friends, that would be the last day anyone would see McNeil alive. He went missing without a trace, only to be found 2 months later and 12 miles away from where he had disappeared. When his body was recovered from the East River, detectives were already suspicious about the circumstances surrounding McNeil's death. Firstly, he was found floating in the water face up, something that isn't typically plausible for drowning victims. He was also found with lacerations across his neck, and a distinct mark, leading detectives to assume that he could have been strangled or hung before he was tossed into the river. Even stranger was the fact that despite missing for 2 months, forensics concluded that McNeil had been dead before he was in the water, and concluded he was only in the water for less than a day. One of the few murders that did not occur during the winter season took place about 15 years ago, in 2002. In October of that year, on Halloween night, a 21-year-old college student, Kris Jenkins, was seen being kicked out of a local bar. He had been alone drinking. The reason as to why was unknown, but one of his friends cited the reason as being girl troubles. Anyway, that would be the last day anyone would see Jenkins alive. After he didn't come back to his dorm the following day, his roommates filed a missing persons report. Sadly, he would turn up dead 4 months later in the Mississippi River, faced up with his arms across his chest. Something that continues to convince many that the Smiley Face Killer is real, and is still out there, is that deaths that resemble those of Kris Jenkins and Patrick McNeil still happen to this day. One of the most recent happened only last year in 2016. Zack Marr was only 22 years old when he went missing on February 13, 2016. He was last spotted alive at the Bell in Hand Tavern, spending time with friends and family, and like the past victims, getting drunk. Unfortunately, he disappeared that same night. 1 month later, his body would be discovered in a river nearby. There was a distinct laceration across his neck, and like previous deaths linked to the Smiley Face Killer, he was found faced up while floating in the river, with indication he had been killed elsewhere. As of right now, most of the Smiley Face murders were deemed accidents, but at least 3, that being the previously mentioned, Kris Jenkins, Patrick McNeil, and Zack Marr, were all classified as homicide. Moving forward, because some of the disappearances happen at the same time in different states, some people have concluded that there are a band of killers committing these crimes. With all this in mind, most people would be quick to point out the fact that there is no actual evidence to suggest all these disappearances are the work of a serial killer, or killers. Thus, most reject the theory in its entirety. However, there are some professionals that claim the theory is in fact true. One such being forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, who had been quoted in saying, "The statistics are so stacked against this number of men, young men, Caucasian males, found in bodies of water in that cluster of states within that period of time, that it seems impossible that these incidents weren't related in some capacity." But sadly, at the end of the day, it is just a theory. If you were to ask me my opinion on whether or not I believe the theory to be true or not, I simply have to say, I'm not sure. On one side, it seems almost mathematically impossible that these deaths aren't related in any way, shape, or form. On the other hand, there is no factual evidence that these crimes were actual murders. Regardless of the case, it is an interesting case study nonetheless. And I'm not the only one who seems to think so. Over the past years, the theory blew up, and it garnered multiple books and documentaries discussing the theory. The 3 most popular being Hunting Smiley, Smiley Face Killers, Coincidence, Conspiracy, or Cover-Up, and The Case of the Drowning Men, investigating the Smiley Face serial murder theory. Well, with that out of the way, let me leave you with this little factoid. Did you know the average serial killer, at least statistically, is probably your average white male in their 30s? In fact, in a research study held by the Federal Bureau of Investigations and Radford University, in the past century alone, 52.21% of serial killers were white, and 90.8% were male.